Hi, and welcome to Veda Revival. So, Veda Revival is a way for us to go back to our roots, our pristine origins. It's a way to go back to who and what we were before the system convoluted pretty much everything. Veda, what it actually means is ancient knowledge. And revival, obviously, we're bringing it back. So, we're all going home. That's what my purpose in all of this is, to help us all go back to what and who we always were before we got lost, or how we ever lost our way in the first place. So the way that I do that is through online memberships and courses, podcasts, social media, webinars, YouTube, selling my own product lines, public speaking, and just various other forms. So with that being said, it's nice to have you all here. I'm married, I have 2 babies, and my journey all sparked all of this. So I'm just really, really excited to share this with you. So in my journey actually started with a health crisis. So this health crisis was the unveiling for me. And without going into too much detail about all the long journey or all the specific details of all of it, I just went through so many different doctors and no one could figure out what was going on. Like, no one could figure it out. And throughout that journey, there was this veil that lifted for me and helped me see it for what it was, the medical industrial complex. And I'm not saying that any doctors or anything are bad people. I'm just saying I finally understood their education comes from somewhere, and who is teaching them the education, and how that keeps people in a system. It keeps us in a loop. It keeps us traumatized. It keeps us controllable. So that woke me up, first of all, to the medical corruption, the food, how they're poisoning our food, and how you can walk into a gas station and literally nothing on these shelves is actual food. But I was raised believing it was food. And understanding that food is information, and what information is that feeding my body. And then the pharmaceutical corruption. And again, just how that's keeping us all in this loop, keeping us in the system, because this is a business, and it is the most genius business. It just woke me up in so many different ways. Then organized religion. So I grew up extremely religious, and there is absolutely nothing wrong with religion. But for me personally, there was this unveiling as well that led me to a religious expansion. I expanded so much in that concept of spirituality and what my relationship to the Creator was. It just woke me up in so many different ways. Then 2020 happened, and like many of you here watching this video, 2020 created 2020 vision, where suddenly I was woken up to the government corruption. What was going on was like so clear to me about what had been going on this entire time, and how we were all duped and following a system that was so corrupt. It woke me up to the birth certificate and all of these things, and how we've been living in slavery for so many years and had no idea. We had no idea. And finally, just like my mind blew with so much information that really started getting me to question everything. Then suddenly I got pregnant. And even though all the doctors throughout my journey were telling me that I could never get pregnant, or I would need fertility treatments, all these things, I got pregnant. And me being a researcher, I had to question everything. I started down the system and realized I started questioning every little thing I started doing because of my history on realizing nothing is what it seems. So I began the research, and I knew I needed to know everything about birth and all of this before I had children and brought them into the world. So getting pregnant essentially woke me up to the business of birth and how all of that is set up. How, again, like I said, it keeps us traumatized. Every little thing they do in the birth setting, whether it be your prenatals, the actual birth, well checks, all of it is specific. It's to keep us in a system. And learning all of this, the unveiling for me, that other veil for me, ultimately led me to having my own free birth and having my own babies and learning how to navigate the system by raising them completely sovereign. So throughout that journey, I finally recognized that the system is working exactly the way it was designed. I knew I needed to exit the system before I ever brought children into it. Because if you look at all of us, we are all trying to do the undoing. We're recognizing that our parents unknowingly brought us into this system of corruption, brought us in with slavery. They had no idea they were signing these contracts, signing our mind, bodies, and souls over to the system. So I realized that I needed to figure this out before I brought children into this world. It helped me realize that there are so many different ways that they keep us in slavery, and I needed to birth and raise my babies completely free. So in order to do that, first of all, I had to realize and uncover the knowledge. I had to do the undoing myself, physically, by correcting statuses legally, doing all of these different things, but also emotionally. There was so much that I had to undo emotionally to be able to bring my babies into this world. So with all of these veils finally being pulled back, I finally was able to recognize how we give away our authority in so many different ways. They tell you not to learn law because you need to hire a lawyer. They tell you not to learn medicine because your doctor can tell you. They tell you not to learn, you don't need to know how to give birth because your OBGYN will help you. All these things that we give our authority away, and I decided that I was not going to give that away. So I finally was able to get pregnant without even taking a pregnancy test, having an entire birth where I never even went to a provider, midwife, or doctor, never even saw a doctor, birthed my baby and had them completely sovereign and out of the system. And I knew I needed to navigate a way for that baby to be raised in a system that is so enslaved. So I had to find a way to navigate this system. So understanding that not just physically giving birth to this baby was what I needed to do, but I needed to emotionally become free first. So recognizing that having free babies was so much more than I ever realized before, it required me to put in a lot of work. I had to do a lot of research and I had to do a lot of healing. So just realizing for me that having born free babies actually starts long before conception. I discovered this as I was pregnant, which, honestly, it's never too late. If you haven't had babies yet, even better. Start before you've had babies. If you're pregnant, that's wonderful. And if you've already had babies, that is okay. There is always a way to heal, and I'm going to help you do that throughout this course, but it is never too late, because by healing yourself, you're healing your generations. But ultimately, this is just a step-by-step process and an awakening and healing for all of us to be able to have babies if we choose, or just to get out of the system in so many different ways. So we're not giving away our authority to anyone else. So in order to first stand in our power and take back our power, we need to recognize and start trusting ourselves. Because if you're anything like me, I was so far disconnected with my body in so many ways, and the system is set up specifically so that happens. They want us disconnected so that we're looking to them to help save us. So what it took for me to be able to have a baby completely outside of the system was connection with body. It took a long process and a long time learning how to bring myself back and stop disassociating or outsourcing all of my power. Because my health crisis, for me, I thought my body was attacking itself. I was really upset at my body because I thought it was doing everything that I didn't want it to do. Every pill I took, everything, it just got worse and worse. And essentially my body just started screaming at me until it got my attention. It did its job. And I had to finally recognize that everything my body did was for me. It was not to me. And it finally was telling me that I needed to start listening to it. And it forced me to listen to it with the way it was screaming at me. And again, I was going to so many different doctors expecting them to tell me what was going on with me instead of ever asking myself, what is going on with me? What do you need? How can I help you? So recognizing the relationship between our body and trauma. So there's a book called The Body Keeps the Score. It's an incredible book, and it just talks about the relationship between trauma and our bodies. And a lot of times what happens when we experience a trauma is essentially almost the soul will leave the body to protect itself. It's a protective mechanism. And so as that soul kind of leaves, the body experiences this trauma, and then the soul can come back. And this is a reason why a lot of trauma people don't remember. It's something that it's the way the mind protects itself is by forgetting. So a lot of times people that don't have a lot of memories from their childhood is because of trauma, but the body never forgets. So it's kind of like when you walk into a hospital and maybe you don't ever remember having a traumatic experience or anything in the hospital, or maybe you have. But you walk in and you just get the creeps because you're like, oh, I hate being in this place. Your body's remembering something. There is a remembering in there. It's not just by chance. Maybe it wasn't even you. Maybe it was your generations that is sealed in your DNA. We're actually going to talk about that as we continue. But really, your body always remembers the trauma. So when your body is speaking, it's remembering an event or something, and maybe your mind doesn't remember, and you're trying to logically tell yourself that you're fine, but your body's telling you it's not fine. Your body remembers. So actually understanding that your body is always speaking, and with every single symptom that comes up, understanding most often it's an emotional root. Sometimes it is a physical root, but most often it's an emotional root. So think about that. Start letting the body speak to you and start listening instead of trying to shut it off. Because most of the time with the allopathic system, we're used to saying, hey, I have this symptom. They give us a pill, and the fire alarm's going off, right? The fire alarm is going off in our body, and the doctor says, here's this pill. It's going to shut off the fire alarm. That's all it does. Shuts off the fire alarm, doesn't actually shut off the fire that's happening. So ultimately over time, it's going to make it worse because we didn't ever put out the actual fire, address the actual fire, and now it's just going to get out of hand until we finally listen. So that's a big, huge thing, is finally understanding that our body is always helping us. Its sole job is to help us. So to understand that too, we need to be able to clear past trauma. So another way I feel that we are enslaved is because so much of our subconscious is running our lives. So they say essentially from birth, and actually it's before birth, it's before conception even, where there is consciousness, is your subconscious is being formed. They say it's generally around age 8-ish. Where everything you're doing, you're just a sponge. You're soaking all of this in. You're learning the world around you. These suddenly become your impulses. So as you grow up and you become an adult, and you suddenly your impulse is to yell at your children, and you can't seem to figure out why that's your natural impulse, it's because that was created in your subconscious. That was your default. That was the brainwave that you were in when your subconscious was being built. Or when you get cut off in traffic and your automatic response is to rage, that's because your subconscious was built on that with what you saw as a child. So clearing all of these different subconscious defaults, clearing past trauma, is extremely important. You can do this yourself with inner child work. There's a way to do all these things, but it is helpful to have a therapist or someone working through you with all of this. So one way that you can connect with your body is through muscle testing. So it's a specific way that you can ask your body, and it actually will give you yes and no answers. You can do this for yourself. You can do this for your babies. And this is, or any of your children, or anyone actually, with their permission. But it's a way that you can connect with your body. And as you're learning to understand what your body's saying, it's a technique that you're able to understand clearly what your body is trying to say when you're sitting here and you're asking it. So this is a technique that I'm going to teach you throughout this course or membership. And it allows you to start trusting yourself. This is the biggest key, because you can't go through big events like birthing your baby unassisted without actually trusting yourself and learning how to tune in. So this is a beautiful way to learn how to trust yourself. Then it's another step where you're choosing to take your own fertility into your own hands. And this can go two ways. So one way is when you're not ready to have a baby yet, learning how to make your own birth control, learning to understand your body well enough that you actually can get pregnant or not get pregnant, and know exactly if you get pregnant without ever taking a test. So this is a choice, like I said, but you know enough that you're not outsourcing any of it. I'm going to teach you your cycles. I'm going to teach you to understand, and eventually, once you understand it and you're tuning into your body well enough, you'll know exactly when you're ovulating, and you'll know exactly when you're in different phases in your life, in different phases in your cycle, without ever even having to look at anything. You will tune in and you will know. So this is a big step in connecting with your body before we join into any other step. And this is not just for women. This is for men too, learning how to connect and not outsource. And that brings me into fertility issues. There are so many women that are struggling with their fertility, or they're being told that they need fertility treatments that are insanely overpriced, or they need certain medications to help them get pregnant. Muscle testing is a beautiful way to pinpoint what is causing your specific fertility issues. So we're able to pinpoint what's going on, whether it be physical. There are a lot of physical things, right, that cause fertility issues, like xenoestrogens, that are hormone disruptors, right? Like plastics and fragrances and all sorts of things. But there's also emotional blocks. So trying to figure out what emotional blocks and clearing them so that you can take charge of your own fertility and you can have babies if you choose to. So one of the biggest things that I learned throughout my personal journey is learning your own birth story. Every time I'd go through a cycle of healing, it always brought me back to my own birth story. And if you don't know, there's something called epigenetics. So essentially what epigenetics is the passing down through generations. So if you really think about it, your mother's mother, so your grandma, when she was pregnant, your mom was in her womb. And in your mother's ovaries were her eggs. So there you were. There you were long before you were ever even conceived. You were sitting in your grandmother and your mom's ovaries. So everything that your grandma was experiencing throughout that pregnancy, you did too, on a cellular level. You experienced every single emotion that flooded her body. So her life experiences, her birth with your mother, you actually felt and you actually experienced too. Then your mother's born. Your mother goes throughout her life and you're experiencing all of these emotions and things throughout her life because you're there. You're an egg. You are consciousness inside her body. Then she gets conceived. Then you get conceived. And then throughout her birth and her gestation and all of these things you are experiencing. Even during your conception, you're experiencing this sperm. So this goes two ways on both, right? Your father, because you actually are consciousness in his body connecting with this egg, you're experiencing these things on a cellular level. So how these things get passed down is through imprints. So these cellular imprints that are happening. So what's interesting is, say your grandmother If she gave birth to your mother in a hospital, you're actually more likely to give birth in a hospital, because the way these things work is trauma will actually continue to recreate circumstances throughout your life to allow you a new opportunity to heal that trauma. So the way it all works is just allowing us all to readdress these traumas to finally heal this scenario. So it's the same reason why I feel like we all have that friend out there that keeps finding the same person to date, this same person in a different body, if you know what I mean. Where it's like they're suddenly like, the energies are always trying to find a scenario that they're always recreating so that you can heal this specific trauma of why your friend is always dating that same guy and can't get out of this rut of dating the same guy until hopefully she finally does. So it's the same thing throughout our life, this epigenetics. So birth trauma, they know how important we are conceived, gestated, and birthed is so important. I cannot emphasize how foundationally important this moment is for both mother baby. This is the rite of passage. Like, this is the moment. And so they specifically sabotage this moment on purpose. And I'm going to emphasize this again, that I don't believe that doctors are trying to sabotage, but there is an insidious agenda behind who taught them how to birth babies. So think about what this baby in this picture is experiencing right here. So this baby looks like it's born via C-section. So instead of going through a canal like they were expecting to, they were cut open and pulled out. And now they're being held by this gloved stranger in this cold, sterile room when they were expecting to be greeted by their mother. And look at this like juicy, juicy cord right here. It's got so much blood still being pumped through this baby, and they're clipping that cord before he's ready. What do you think that feels like for that baby? What kind of experience or imprint do you feel like is going through that baby? To me, almost feels like an alien invasion. This is what I would expect an alien invasion to feel like, where suddenly you're somewhere else with strangers and nothing feels like home, or what you were experiencing for the last 9 months in your mother's womb, being cared for and loved and provided for. This is very scary and very traumatic if you really sit and think about it. So now I need you all to sit and think back on your own birth story. And do you even know your own birth story? That's the biggest key. When I got pregnant, I had never even heard my own birth story, which is crazy when I start thinking about it. So that's when I started deep diving. How was I born? What was my experience? So what I started doing is I started sitting on a conscious level of what it felt like to be conceived. What were my parents' relationship like when I was conceived? Was I wanted? What was my birth experience like? So before I ever even talked to my mom or asked her about my birth experience, I actually sat with my body and I connected with her, and I asked her about her experience. I asked her how she was conceived. Was I conceived in love? What was the relationship like in my parents' relationship? Were they happy with each other? What was it like when they first found out they were pregnant with me? Was I wanted? What emotions were going through my parents' lives as I was being gestated? What my birth experience was like? What did it feel like to be born drugged? All of these things I had to sit with and bring to consciousness. And it's interesting because I wrote it all down. And I sat with these feelings and what it felt like. This body memory, like I said, the body keeps the score. And I called my mom and I asked her what my birth story was, and she told me that it was this beautiful story in her mind. At a hospital setting, baby comes out, she puts me on her chest, she breastfeeds. It's this just beautiful experience. And I thought that was weird because that wasn't anything the same about how I experienced it in my body. So I thought that was kind of strange, but again, we're two completely different humans with different lenses, different experiences. So what was kind of interesting is a few weeks later, my mom called me and she said, "Hey, I want to read you something." And she read me a journal entry of something she wrote a few days after I was born. And what is crazy is it was all exactly how I had felt and experienced. So again, her trauma of what happened during my birth, she was protecting herself. Her mind was protecting itself from the trauma that she had experienced. And so that was really actually kind of crazy for me. And I started digging deeper into my generational birth stories, what my grandma's birth story, learning about her story with my mom, and then started going into genealogy about my ancestors, essentially. And what's really crazy is how many things were passed down over and over again. So every single one of my ancestors had had a stillborn. And I knew, just based on what I was learning about passing these emotions down, is that it was up to me to heal, or I was going to experience the same thing. I wasn't about to do that. So bringing all of this to consciousness and healing it so that I wasn't passing this scenario down was so important for me. So it's going to be really important for you too. All these fears, all these things, realizing that they're being passed down and it's up to us to heal so that we're not passing this to our babies for them to now heal for their generations. And like I said, it's not just for us. It's for our spouses or our partners. We all have our own birth stories that we need to be clearing and healing before we're bringing generations in. And on that topic, like I said, if you've already had your babies and you've already had these traumatic experiences, it's really interesting to start connecting these generational things that you're realizing that are passed down. And even if you've already had an experience that you feel was traumatic in your own birth, you can still heal that. And you can still heal that for your child, because like I said, when you're healing yourself, you're healing your generations. So thinking back on all these different scenarios, right? Like for me, I had to sit and think, was I wanted when my parents found out that they were pregnant with me? Me and my older sister are 16 months apart, so they were not expecting to have me. It was like this moment of like, oh crap, what are we going to do? That was how I first experienced it. And for me, what's really interesting is feeling this unwanted feeling the moment they found out they were pregnant with me. And this unwanted feeling, what's really interesting is now drawing that onto my life and how many different scenarios I created this scenario of feeling unwanted. How many times that same scenario was created for me to finally heal that. And the way I was able to heal that was, you know what, when I was first pregnant with my baby, like I said, I wasn't expecting to get pregnant. So when I did get pregnant and I had all these things I was doing, it was like, oh, what am I going to do about all these other things? I just relived that pattern of being unwanted. Because what do you think my baby was thinking when that was my first thought when I found out he was even there? So I had to have many, many conversations with my baby and tell them that those feelings had nothing to do with him and everything to do with me, and I was healing these, and he was so, so, so wanted. So there's so many different things that play out in our births, and how, like I said, they're completely sabotaged. Every single thing, down to putting the hat on the head, to swaddling the baby, to wiping them off. For me, that's what it felt like. I knew that I had been whisked away and wiped away, and it was interesting that showed up in my relationship with my mother too. There was not this bond that I needed to have or expected or thought should be there, and I wanted to have that with my baby. So what's really interesting is when you start realizing that what happens in a hospital birth, in a hospital setting, is a ritual. Unknowing to the doctor and unknowing to the mother and the father and the baby being born, it is a ritual that we are experiencing, and we need to release it. We need to release the experience and make a new story. Because many, for example, just even having an epidural, our body is expecting to feel this baby come out of our bodies. It's expecting to feel this birth like our bodies were divinely created to do. And when the body doesn't feel the baby come out because we have an epidural, the baby comes out and now we have this baby, but the body didn't experience it. And now the body starts experiencing postpartum depression because it's mourning the loss of a baby because it thought your baby died. It never felt your baby come out. So it's so interesting to start connecting all these different dots about what's actually happening. And then we keep making mothers think something's wrong with them. Or, some children that have a hard time connecting or bonding with their mothers, think about a little baby boy who's been circumcised, got whisked away, and this most sensitive part of their penis is cut off, and they're sitting there wondering, where is my mom that's supposed to be protecting me? Just sit with that for a moment. What would that feel like? Or what did that feel like? So learning your birth story is a very, very important part of this. And then we're going to reclaim your birth. Reclaiming your birth is so important because now that's your cellular imprint, right? But we're actually going to create a new imprint. So we're going to sit down, we're going to create a new imprint for you and a new imprint for all of your future generations. And I cannot tell you how important this step is. So it's something that we're going to work through during my membership and courses. So next is conscious conception. So conscious conception requires both parents to be conscious. So contrary to popular belief, where it's the mother that's having this baby and it's just essentially we put moms in a box and say mom is having this baby, but really, yes, mom is physically creating and carrying this baby, but what people don't know is the consciousness of that baby is coming from the father. So everything about the consciousness of the father and where he is in his life and what he's doing, what he's thinking is just as almost arguably more important than the mother, which we all know how important the mother is in gestating and conceiving this baby. So keep that in mind. Again, this is something we deep dive and talk about through the membership very deeply, is the consciousness. It requires both parents, the nutrition that it takes for both parents to prepare for conception. Divas of Creation, there are midwives, unseen midwives on the other side that actually help you conceive your baby. So that's another thing that we talk deeply about, and connecting with your spirit baby. Because believe it or not, you can connect with this baby long before they even are conceived. There is consciousness. They are there. You can talk to them and be guided. And we will talk about how to do that. A wild pregnancy. So a wild pregnancy, what that means is having a pregnancy where you're not outsourcing anything. For me, like I said, I never saw a provider. I was never checked. Like I said, I didn't even take a test because I felt like I would be betraying my body by making sure of something that my body had already made very, very clear that I was pregnant. My baby had told me I was pregnant. I wasn't going to take this test that was going to verify that and betray all of my knowing. So I continued that throughout my entire pregnancy. I never did any ultrasounds or anything like that because I just tuned into my body. So that's essentially what a wild pregnancy is. It's just tuning into your body, tuning into your intuition. If your intuition tells you that you need something checked, listen to that intuition. But it's not asking someone else outside of yourself if you need something, if that makes sense. So, again, on this topic of dad is pregnant too. So everything he's doing throughout this pregnancy, if he's consuming alcohol or any sort of drugs, that is affecting the consciousness of baby. So know that any low vibration things are affecting the consciousness of this baby for both mom and dad. Again, we'll go over nutrition for both mom and dad. We deeply talk about ultrasounds and Dopplers and radiation, the different kinds of radiation and the dangers of ultrasounds, and how you can actually connect with your baby and find out the gender of your baby without ever even having an ultrasound or even a blood test. So if you're supposed to know. The inner work during pregnancy. Every single thing that comes up during your pregnancy, whether it be a physical symptom or an emotion, is something divine and something to be dealt with. It is always coming up to be healed and cleared. So a lot of the time we just like put things off as like, it's morning sickness, or all these aches and pains, or things we just, that's what happens. And we take a pill or whatever and we just let it go. That actually is something that's coming up for us to heal and clear. So sitting and doing the inner work during your pregnancy is so, so, so important. So parents' alignment is extremely important. Where you're at in your relationship, what's going on in your relationship will directly correlate to the position of your baby. So knowing that is it's very, very important, but also knowing your baby is also very, very wise. So yeah, we're talking about parents' alignment, baby's position, and creating a sacred birth plan. This is something we'll deep dive very heavily on, how to create a sacred birth plan, because this is not just a physical thing, although we do go over all the physical things. It's so much more. It's a spiritual rite of passage. Body work. So chiropractic care and CFT. So CFT is craniosacral fascial therapy. So if you don't know what fascia is, it's kind of like when you cut through a chicken. It's all that white stuff that holds the chicken together. We actually have fascia all throughout our bodies that goes through our organs, our muscles, our brain tissue, pretty much everything. And something about fascia is that trauma is stored in fascia. So releasing fascia is super, super important, and also allowing that tightness to be relieved so that baby in our body isn't being restricted to a certain position, which is then going to be causing them trauma, physical trauma too. It allows them to be in their own perfect position without you restricting them because of your own tightness, if that makes sense. So highly recommend chiropractic care and craniosacrofacial therapy throughout your pregnancy, before your pregnancy, even better. And always connecting with your baby, always letting your baby guide you to what they need. If you listen, they are telling you how, where, what they need. Which then leads to a free birth, which is a birth that's out of the system, where a free birth is an unassisted birth, where you don't even need a midwife to essentially guide you. And the reason I felt like I needed a free birth was so I wasn't looking for anyone else to tell me if things were good or if things were okay. I wanted to allow my body and my intuition to just step forward, because I knew no one cared more about my baby than I did. So I was going to do everything that my baby needed. So that allowed me to deeply tune into that. So preparing for a free birth, obviously there's going to be a lot of physical preparation. That's going to be knowing what emergencies could arise and how to remedy them. Preparing also with towels and, different things, tinctures that are going to help you be physically prepared for what's going to happen. Preparing spiritually. Like I said, this is, I would say, way more spiritual than even physical, and physical is a big aspect. But spiritually preparing, we're going to deep dive how to spiritually prepare, and talk about who is invited. Realizing that every single person that you invite into your birth space is an intervention, because every single person is coming in with their own traumas that they're bringing into the scenario energetically, like I was talking about before. So if you have a midwife that's worried about you hemorrhaging, she can actually create a hemorrhage because she's worried about it and she's creating that energy, and that's actually creating this energy. So being so specific of who is invited into that sacred space is so important, and making sure every single person that is in that space is cleared and completely trusts you too. And if anyone is in that space, that they are there as a witness, not as an authority. So yeah, we talk a lot about that. Having siblings present is extremely important as well, because energetically it actually allows them to be less jealous of each other because they are greeting that baby into this world. They're part of this whole process. So it's actually really important that they're there and are experiencing that, creating that imprint. What kind of imprint? This is a picture of me having my second baby. You can see my oldest child here is watching what's going on. What do you think his imprint is now of birth and his mother birthing in her power? It's extremely important to create these imprints in our babies too. And we talk about our guest date or our due date, and understanding that when babies choose to come is their choice, and how important that choice is, and not ever taking that choice away. Even these natural induction forms, there is absolutely nothing natural about inducing something that isn't ready. So the time and the day that your baby comes is their choice and is very divine. If you go into numerology, it's actually pretty interesting and pretty crazy how divine that aspect of it. So putting it as a guest date rather than a due date, and not letting that get to your head. We talk about all the labor tips, and beliefs and fears are what cause childbirth pain. So childbirth is not painful. It never was meant to be. It was never designed to be painful. There's so many things that our fears of things we've been groomed to fear, this rite of passage, and it creates pain. So just knowing that it was never meant to be painful, and it isn't painful if you heal and clear all of these things, it's actually the most beautiful psychedelic experience that you should be excited for. Knowing that you actually can experience it, and that's how it always was meant to be experienced. So again, this is another thing I'm going to emphasize 1,000 times is fathers. You are just as active and just as important as the mom. So we talk about free birth for fathers, understanding that you are the shaman. So what does it take for a shaman to prepare for someone that's actually going to host someone else that's going through an ayahuasca trip where they're traveling dimensions, right? But let's level it up times 1,000, where you are the shaman and the mother of your baby is traveling dimensions and retrieving your baby, bringing them here, and you are the greeter at this portal. That's a pretty big deal if I can't emphasize that enough. So if you look at this photo right here, that's me birthing my first baby and being caught by his father. His father is the first person that laid hands on him. They connected eyes, and how important that is, instead of having a doctor, a gloved stranger, essentially greet them, pass them around to 10 different people before they're even handed to their mother. It's kind of like, when they say a little baby bird, the first thing it lays eyes on is the one that creates that imprint of who they believe their mother is. It's the same thing for babies. So think about what that means. If this baby is creating its first imprint with a doctor, what kind of imprint and relationship do we feel like we have with the medical system throughout our whole lives, and why that's so hard to break? Just sit with that. Moving on, and knowing, we talk deeply about how to support your partner physically and mentally, and what it takes, again, to prepare to be the shaman of this grand experience, and how this situation and scenario is actually the masculine feminine polarity, and what it takes to receive a newborn, and what imprint that's creating for their feminine and masculine imprint. And we're going to talk about lotus birth. So a lotus birth is when you leave the placenta and cord attached until it falls off naturally. So this is extremely important because the placenta is such a beautiful organ that does not get the recognition it deserves. It grew, and it was your baby's life force. And it is considered the forgotten chakra. I completely agree with that. So generally what will happen is baby comes out, and within seconds they're cutting that cord. And if they hadn't have cut that cord, most emergencies that happen once a baby was born would have been completely fine if they were still connected to that life source. So that actually is what causes so many different emergencies is a third of that baby's blood is still in that placenta when they're born. So like I was pointing out in that earlier picture, how juicy that cord was, like a third of your blood. Can you imagine what it would be like to not have a third of your blood and to be cut off from that? Like how like life, like that would make you gasp for life, essentially, having that cut off. And that is traumatic. That is your baby's blood. And not even going into the dark, how they essentially, they sell placentas for $50,000 because that's how many stem cells and life-saving resources actually that placenta has that belong to your baby are worth to the system. If that tells you how important it is, but that belongs to your baby. So instead of cutting the cord, or there's other things that you can do that actually create a ceremony around this, like burning the cord. For me, allowing your baby to be free, a lotus birth, what it does is it allows your baby to choose when they transition. And I will tell you what a crazy experience it is to have a lotus birth, because the moment, for both of my babies, we did lotus births, and theirs fell off about 3 days later. So at that 3-day mark, like the moment their cords, they chose to transition and the cords came off, it was like we both landed. Like suddenly my feet were on the ground and it was like, here I am for both of us. So it is this beautiful spiritual aspect, but there's also this life force, this aura. When you're cutting that cord that's not meant to be cut, it opens so much to the elements of spirits and different energies entering a space that it shouldn't yet. So we go deeply into just the spiritual benefits, the physical benefits, the ceremony of it. Honestly, a lot of people think, they're like, isn't that weird to just like have your placenta in a bag? And yeah, it's weird. But also it forces you to slow down. It forces you to sit in bed and just be with your baby, connecting and bonding with your baby like you're supposed to. So it kind of forces you to do what you should be doing anyway. So yeah. And then we talk about, obviously it's going to be an organ. So there's a specific way you need to care for it. So we talk in depth about how to care for it. I have my own line of placenta bags, things, and how to care for this placenta, how you're going to do this during your lotus birth. And what is so incredible about the connection with this baby is even the ceremony and ritual before you touch this placenta. And you'll notice when you touch that placenta, and obviously you need to get permission from your baby first before you do, they feel everything. You'll notice a direct connection and how crazy it is. Or when you're breastfeeding your baby, when they're connected to this, it is pulsing. It is feeling everything. They are so divinely connected, and it's the most beautiful thing. So like I said, I have my own line of placenta bags because you really want to be so careful about even the energies that are touching this like beautiful, sacred organ. And having high vibration things, having the right herbs and salts and things that are being used to care for that. So yes, that's something that I have on my product line too. So then we're going to deeply talk about breastfeeding and how drugs and the interference that cause issues. Because so many of us think like, oh, I'm not sure if I'm going to be able to breastfeed. Like we've just normalized maybe not being able to breastfeed our child. And let's go back to these imprints. If you weren't breastfed as a child, you don't have the imprint of breastfeeding. And now we're going to recreate this imprint, right? So how important these imprints are, first of all, and knowing that if you're born drugged, how easy is it to do anything normal when you're drugged? So your baby, when they're born drugged, a lot of the time they are going to have a hard time latching. And then that just creates this whole cascade. Again, the whole cascade of interventions, even with breastfeeding is something that we heavily talk about. But that's going to play a big, huge role. Breastfeeding and the not having interference and trusting your body that your body will make and is capable of creating and nourishing your body. It is kind of crazy when you really think about the fact that we just grew this baby, we birthed this baby, your baby had everything they ever needed, and then suddenly we're wondering if we are capable of nourishing the baby the way it needs. a lot of it is like mental because we've been groomed to believe, well, they've normalized for us that breastfeeding isn't always going to happen for us, not telling us that a lot of the times they're drugs they're using, or the trauma that happens and the lack of bonding that's supposed to actually allow that bonding, that beautiful moment, is what's actually causing it. The breast crawl. Like, it is so beautiful. Actually, when a baby is born, they are coherent enough. They know exactly what to do in crawling to that breast. They know exactly what to do. And even with inverted nipples, like, you can still breastfeed with inverted nipples no matter what your doctor or pediatrician who was not trained to talk about this is telling you. And just talking, no timed feedings, just listening to your baby, letting them tell you and cue you when they're hungry, feeding them when they're hungry, letting everything be baby led. I talk a lot about avoiding bottles and binkies, how to do that. But essentially, I mean, this isn't going to work for everyone's lifestyle. We're just going to be talking about what's optimal. Again, going back to our pristine origins. We didn't have bottles and binkies and all these things that are mimicking the breast. So, and this goes even into like jaw and airway development and how we're creating airways that aren't optimal and why. Anyway, that's a deep dive. We'll go down later. Tongue ties, all of that. We'll talk about not giving babies formula, looking at the ingredients and what is in formula, not having distractions. This is a moment where you should be connecting deeply with your baby instead of texting on your phone or watching TV, because if you know much about water and how water holds memory, think about your breast milk. You are transferring everything you know, everything you're thinking, everything you're feeling through your breast milk. So this moment is very, very, very important, and to actually use this moment to its fullest benefit, that you are transferring all of your knowledge and thoughts and emotions to your baby. So don't be distracted during this moment. We're going to talk a lot about circumcision, and let's just call it what it is. It's genital mutilation. The United States is the only place where we still routinely practice circumcision. We would never do this for girls. Like, just the thought, if we were like, should we circumcise a girl or should we cut a girl, which I know they do in some countries, which to me is so barbaric. It's just as barbaric as doing this to males. Foreskin has function. We were created with foreskin for a reason. Again, we're going to deep dive this a lot, but we're also going to talk a lot about how it actually alters the brain. So they have done brain scans on baby and shown that before and after their circumcision, their brain chemicals changed and they are not the same. So what you can always wonder and imagine what it would be like if that trauma didn't happen to your baby. And again, not to scare anyone, if any of your babies have been circumcised, all of this can be healed, but obviously the hope is that we're going to prevent this before the trauma happens, right? Any trauma can be healed, and don't fault yourself for what you didn't know. But it does alter the brain and disrupts bonding. Because like I was saying before, what does this baby feel like when the most sensitive part of their penis is being cut and they're wondering where their mom is? Like, why did their mom let them be in this situation? And again, that's healing for the mom too, because she didn't know better. So the lost boys. So hundreds of baby boys die every single year in circumcision. This is not something that they tell parents. And if they did, if you knew that your baby could actually die, and babies do die all the time through this surgery, I don't know how many parents would, when it's just for nothing. They say it's for looks, but even that's, and don't even get me started on that. But yeah, how many parents would do this knowing that many babies actually die, or their penises are cut off or mutilated? They're giving your baby an erection before they do this too. And it's only in a hospital setting that we decide that that's okay to do to a baby boy. So there are a lot of reasons not to circumcise. This is just the tip of the iceberg, and we're going to deep dive that through my courses and memberships. But they actually use use foreskin in high-end cosmetics. So because all the stem cells in them too. So they are making profit off of this. So that's another reason they are incentivized to circumcise your child. We'll talk a lot about postpartum healing, how to nourish your body and your baby optimally, the 5-5-5 rule on staying in the bed, near the bed, by the bed for 5 days each, talking about support, tearing, how even 4th degree tears don't require stitches. Everything about it is divine. The tinctures that you can use to help, and chiropractic care for both you and your baby. It's a modality, CFT, the craniosacrofacial therapy, is something that I learned myself so that I could practice on my baby within minutes of him being born. So that is something that I would highly, highly recommend, and we talk about. Then there's a whole lifestyle of raising sovereign babies, right? Like I talked about, first releasing all this past trauma so that you can consciously parent, that you're making decisions and reactions towards your baby or your child, your teen, your adult, however old your baby is, or your child is, that you're consciously parenting and not on impulse. So here's that. We talked about co-sleeping, the fear-mongering that's gone into co-sleeping and why there's fear-mongering about co-sleeping. We're going to talk about elimination communication, which is potty training. I hate to say potty training because your baby is the one that actually trains you. Think about what we did in our roots before we ever had diapers and we ever had marketing campaigns for diapers that make a lot of money. What did babies do before diapers? What did parents do before diapers? We actually, now that we have diapers, are training babies to sit in their own pee and poop, and that is absolutely not normal. Babies don't like to sit in their pee and poop, but we're actually training them to do it. If you actually connect and pay attention to your baby, they are cueing you every single time they need to go, and they're actually telling you when they need to go, expecting you to take them, and over time when you don't, then they stop cueing you. So it's actually really, really important, and we talk a lot about this, on how to learn the communication that your baby's telling you. Because again, it's not about potty training. It's about communicating with your baby and listening to them and making sure they know they're being heard. Both my babies have been peeing and pooping on the potty since they were a week old. This, I think in this picture, this is I want to say he's 7 months old in this picture, but peeing and pooping on the potty. So yeah, we'll talk about how to do that. And then cloth diapering is a backup, because we still have to fit our lifestyles when we're out and about and we're in the car. Our car is honestly, we still have to fit it into our lifestyles, right? So using cloth diapering as a backup, not using plastics, because we know how plastics are hormone disruptors, and then we're putting that right on our baby's genitals. It just, anyway, that's not something we want to be putting on our baby's genitals. So we'll talk about cloth diapering, baby-led weaning, for ultimate jaw, mouth development too. Encouraging primal reflexes is extremely important, where we're not going to swaddle. We're not going to do all these things that are inhibiting these reflexes that are actually supposed to be connecting our brain in a divine way. So the more we are inhibiting, like the Moro reflex, where they just reach out, that's a really important reflex that they need to be doing. So when we're cutting off that reflex, we're actually disconnecting brain signals. So we talk a lot about primal reflexes. So living a sovereign life and raising babies sovereign requires you not to outsource to a doctor. And again, that goes back if you're feeling like you need to for some reason, but you have all the tools up until a moment where you feel like you need to see a doctor. For me, unless I got into an extreme car accident where I was extremely messed up, that's probably the only reason I would actually go to a doctor. I would do anything I could to not go to a doctor, because I feel like I have the skills and I want to help you guys learn the skills as well. So we're going to talk a lot about baby well checkups, living a vaccine-free life. We'll deep dive that. Growing your own garden and actually making food for your own DNA. And it's such a beautiful practice. How to create your own tinctures and growing your own herbs, preserving your own food, homeopathy, understanding disease, and actually how you can heal yourself. So you are also going to become your own dentist and hygienist. So my background is I was a dental hygienist, and that is still very much a passion of mine, but I want to teach you guys. Essentially, I had to, like, everything I learned in school, I had to unlearn because, again, it's a business. They don't have a business unless people are walking in that door constantly. So unlearning everything you ever knew about dental health is what I had to do. So we're going to talk a lot about tongue posture, airway and jaw development, how to be your own hygienist, remineralizing your teeth, healing your own cavities, mouth meridians, these circuits, what it means when we're extracting teeth. Think about it deeply. Why are our jaws developing in a way that we actually don't have enough room for all of our teeth that are supposed to grow in? And think about what it means to have wisdom teeth. The fact that we call them wisdom teeth, there is energetic components to that, and why we're removing our wisdom teeth and what that means. So we'll talk a lot about that. Education. So how do you raise children if you're having them out of the system? We're going to talk a lot about unschooling, homeschooling, everything being child-led. And what's interesting is children are absorbing everything. Like, they are insane sponges, and mostly up before the age of 5. So it's actually kind of interesting that we don't start school until 5, when most of that sponge component should have been utilized. And you actually can teach your baby math and reading as an infant. So I'm going to teach you guys, and we talk about how to do that. And then, of course, there is the whole component of navigating the public world as a private person. So that means getting a passport without a birth certificate because they weren't registered to the system, getting and operating out of a trust, getting an EIN, getting bank accounts, getting a ITIN if you choose to. We'll go through all of that because you have to raise this baby in a world that is public. So learning how to navigate the waters is something we are going to heavily discuss at that point too, because I think that's one of the biggest concerns that parents have is, okay, say I have this baby, I don't register them, how are they going to function? So there is a whole way in a world of navigating this and keeping your babies private and sovereign without registering them to the government. So essentially, yeah, being born free is way more than just birth. I hope I got that point across. That it's so much more, and it's not just babies. It's for you living a sovereign life and how to do that without outsourcing your power. So all of these things that we've been discussing in this video, every topic and more is going to be discussed in my monthly memberships and courses. So throughout these monthly memberships, slowly each topic is going to be launched over time. So you can be a monthly member. It's more cost effective to be a monthly member, or you can decide to buy courses individually as they come out. However you choose to learn this information is up to you. But go to VedaRevival.com. That's where you're going to get access to these memberships and courses. Follow me on Instagram at Veda.revival. Or if you have any questions, email me at info@VedaRevival.com. Please go to my website, sign up for my email list so you can stay up to date for events or new courses that are being launched. And I'm really, really, really excited to deep diving all of these topics with you.